Hello, everybody. I'm going to attempt to speak loud enough so I don't have to use that, because it turns out this is for the recording, that's for the room. That's a little awkward. So we're going to see if this works, but definitely tell me if you can't hear me in the back there, and I can switch to the microphone. But anyways, as my fabulous lead show I told you, I'm Michelle. I'm from 18F. It's the number 18 and the letter F, not to be confused with like ATF, which is a different part of government entirely. We are a part of government, and I'm going to see if I can make it through this entire thing without my like rock star thing falling off here. Turns out I'm not a rock star. We are kind of a design and development contracting group within government. We're federal employees, we're not actual contractors, but we work with other parts of government to get digital services done. This is our website. But I'm here today to talk to you about one of our projects and how we made it. I also was like, everybody hates PowerPoints. I'm going to try a new thing, which is I actually wrote out the process that we kind of employed that I want to tell you about today, so you will have it as a resource later. You can let me know after this talk if that was a good idea or a bad idea, but we're experimenting. We're going to see if it works, so that way you all have a place to go later to look up all the stuff that we're doing. I also thought we weren't recording, so I was like, well, if you all actually want to know these things, I don't have a PowerPoint that has like 3 fancy words and a picture of Steve Jobs, and like that's it. That doesn't help you later. So in any case, we're going to talk a bit today about this website. So like I said, we're 18F. We work with other parts of government. One of the folks that we work with is the Department of the Interior. The Department of the Interior is kind of like a shell company for other parts of government. You may have heard of the Park Service, that's a part of Department of the Interior. You may have heard of BLM, Bureau of Land Management, that's a part of Interior. You may have heard of, let's see, you might remember a not so great part of history, Deepwater Horizon off the coast in the Gulf of Mexico. The folks that manage that part of our offshore resources are a part of Department of the Interior. A few years back, let's see, it was 3 or 4 years back at this point, a certain office in that group said, hey, we're going to work with this international group called Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, part of that title. And figure out a way to make all of our data about extractive industries more accessible and more usable, something that industry folks can get on board with, something that civil society groups like nonprofits, that sort of thing, can also get on board with, and government's happy about. We eventually had this website. I'm going to tell you today, though, about how we got to this website. If you read my little pitch, you might remember that I wrote things like, oh, I'm sure we've all been there, and we have. The thing where we start building a thing, and we're like, oh, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be a dashboard. There's going to be even things. There's going to be like no missing data. All this stuff is going to display beautifully. And then when we actually get the data, we're all like, oh, we forgot 50 different parts of how to make this happen. This is the thing I wrote up. I'm not going to read this entire thing for you. I am going to show you the link at the end, so if you want to go back to this later, it's there for you. But I'm going to use it to chat a little bit. Okay, so at a super high level, this is what we did. And I'll be going through some of the examples of how we did this thing, and then I'm going to leave time for questions at the end, because I figure you will have plenty of questions, and maybe that's the best way to talk about this sort of work. I'm sure you've all ran across specific sticking points when you've tried to do this sort of work. So how we got to that website is initially doing lots of user research. I know, how many of you do you consider yourselves more design type folks? Few. I mean, you can be more than one thing. And how many more like data type folks? And you're like, user research, what? Yeah. So one of the things that was really neat about this project is that even though it was data and very data oriented, we were given flexibility. We were able to go in and say well, we know it's all like ones and zeros. We know that's all very you think that we should do this through statistics. But actually, let's go talk to our target audiences. Let's talk to the people who might be using this data in the end and see what they're interested in. And we spent quite a bit of time. That was our first thing that we did. We spent quite a bit of time talking to folks who might actually care about, the mine that's in their neighborhood next door and want to know how to interact with that data. And that let us do things like, okay, all these different agencies across, and in your cases, maybe it's not agencies, it's stakeholders. All of you stakeholders who think you want these 50 different things. Actually, these folks that we talk to don't care about any of that. They actually just want to know basic definitions about XYZ. And that's how we started this project. I'm not going to go into lots of details on that because that's a whole different, like you could go to a whole conference on just like user testing, user research, this kind of thing. But if you want to talk about, if you are curious, definitely ask me questions. We'll get there. After that, the point 2 I want to make to you today, 4 big points. Point 2 today, when you're doing this sort of design work, always get your data. Never use mock data. I don't know if that's come up for you before. If you get, there are people say, oh yes, here's the data set. It will look something like this. It never looks like the people think they mock it up like, and then you try and put it into your models later, and it's never right. Yeah, so there's a very good tip written further down there, but again, I'm not going to read through the thing for you. If someone says, hey, team, you should build this thing, but we're not going to give you the data set, the thing you say back is, oh, that will result in a day-by-day slip of our launch date. And that usually gets people's attention and is 100% true. You cannot possibly start to design for information that you don't know what it looks like yet. Let's see, what else have I got there? All right. Right. So for part 3 and 4, this is the part that got super interesting for our team. We started doing very small iterative cycles and playing with the data. This is to say, if you've got a big data set, you might think, oh, I should kind of look at it and then make a full page that looks fully done out and this kind of thing. Actually, a great first step is to pull that information into something much simpler. Let me see, I believe I pulled up. So, for example, one of the first things we did when we got a bunch of our data together for this site is have one of our talented folks, actually who's sitting right here, being very supportive, play with the data a little bit and pull it up into something that we as a team could talk about. Because the first step is you figuring out what you think this data means and finding out where all the holes are. It's not lost time. Like a lot of times you'll talk to your lead stakeholder or something like that, and they'll be like, oh, but you're not actually designing the thing. But you are. There's a lot of throwaway work involved in this sort of thing. And then, once you've started figuring that out, we found, very useful, actually writing out a thing. Let me pull that up in a bigger space for you. Okay. So what we found out over time in our project is that people wanted to look at this complex data via location, which makes sense. Probably a lot of you have run into that before too. It's like folks are interested in what's local to them. So hey, we had all these like, oh, what does this data look like? Let's pull it into basic charts. Okay, we kind of understand it. Let's actually try to write out, translate what is like a robot data set, of course, things that are big, made for robots to understand, into something that is humans, sentences that humans can understand, using the real data. So this, we would, for example, start to write up a thing, say, hey, Sean, can you pull the actual numbers for Utah, copy and paste them over? Does this work? Does this not work? Oh, whoops. Like you'll see in comments here, I think there's one down here where it's like, oh, we found out only 3 of the commodities that we were dealing with actually show up on this site. Whoops, is that the same across all 50 states? Oh, we can't actually write that design like that at all. So before you've invested in creating an entire website, you've got this kind of space for you to play and understand, and it's really cheap. Google Docs, very cheap to play with. All right. Once you're at that next step, then you can test it. You don't need to build out the entire thing. Build out the next step for you to learn a thing. For example, in that one, we were like, actually, we're really not sure if people even want to know about gilsonite, for example, something like that. So let's build something out so we can test just that one thing, understand if it's important or not, and then spend all the time investing in building that out or not, or this next thing. So hopefully me rambling through this long thing that I wrote out, which again, we'll see if that was a good way to go or not. You can let me know when you look at it later. The idea is you're able to understand the data quickly, write it up in a way that makes sense for your team, and then move through these tiny testing phases to figure out what's making sense and not making sense, instead of not having the data to start with, having the wrong data to start with, or building out this entire thing, finally showing it to folks, and then them being like, oh, actually, none of this relates to me at all, none of this I understand at all, and then you've just spent all this time that isn't helpful. I think I will pause now, again, because I'm doing this a new way, see if there are any questions so far. I've got other things that I'd love to talk about, but that was a lot of words to start. It's early in the morning. And we'll see. Do you all have any questions so far? I like conversation more than talking at folks, so. Oh, got it. So the question was, and doing this because I know we're recording, how long was the entire project? It changed over time, I should say, but 18F has been working on this project for, let's see, over 3 years now? About 3 years, something like that. In terms of like a larger project scope, I don't know if y'all are interested in that too. It's all this lives within a much larger bureaucracy, of course. And when this project started out, it was, oh, we should publish things in PDF. You know, it was like printed PDFs. And we started with a few people who had a vision that was like, no, we really don't need to be doing PDFs anymore. Come on. So we started quite small. And the first thing that we built out was, a little prototype that said, yes, you can put things on the internet and people won't misunderstand it and sue you. It'll be fine. And from that, we're able to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So even this iterative process of figuring out what to build next also included the scope of the project generally. And right now, we're at a place where folks are really happy with the website, which I'll show you again. Let's pick a different page of the website this time, because it's cool. Nope, that's not it. That's an older. There we go. Okay, I'll show you some of the fun parts of that a little later. So people are pretty happy with the website now, and now the point of our work is to figure out better data pipelines to make this more maintainable over time, pull in some other parts of Department of the Interior, that sort of thing. Our best story of late was one of our folks going to, what was it? Oh, with the administration change, there's new heads of the different parts of Department of the Interior. The head of USGS went to Congress for something, and the folks at Congress were like, hey, have you heard of this? Why aren't you involved in that? Never want to have your boss embarrassed to Congress. So he came back to his folks, we're like, what's the CIDI thing? Why aren't we doing it? So we're happy about that. Yeah.
Two questions. One, are you using geographic, where are you getting your geographic data? That's a challenge, I don't know where you're pulling from.
Yeah, well, so all the data, generally speaking, for this site, it isn't data that we produce, it's data that's taken from other places. So one of our challenges with this site is figuring out which bits of the data, the question was, is there geographic data, or where are we pulling geographic data from? Figuring out which data sets have geographic data already in them, which ones don't, and then how we can combine them and not combine them. So I'm trying to remember. So say 2 or 3 or 4 out of all the data sets that we're using here have geographic data built in. Yeah. Does that answer your question or not quite?
Not really, but I'll ask you slightly different.
Okay.
Given you're pulling from a whole bunch of data sets,
yep.
How many of those data sets, or is there a master list of those data sets to be available to a civilian?
Oh, sure. So the question was, given we're pulling from lots of different data sets, is there a master list somewhere? So if somebody wanted to go pull these data sets, play with them themselves, is it there? Yes. So one of the main ideas behind this is all the data is well documented, so if folks want to go play with it themselves, they can go do that. Every section of the site has a related data and documentation link, which takes you to information about where that section came from. Come on, you can open, you can do it. We also personally, or we, as the developers, also, I forget where the link is, but we also have extra information on all the code's open, by the way, there's a link to our GitHub. Link to how we use the data as developers to create all the things. So there's here's the documentation with the data dictionary. Here you can download the Excel, by the way, because that's what that sort of user said they wanted to play with data with. Also, here's the section for all the developers where you want all the gotchas in the data and how we actually pulled this in and that kind of thing. Yep. Did that answer your question? Not quite still?
Oh, yes, but so all this on GitHub, so I can find the code and build this up.
Yep. You can fork the site right now and build it however you like. But also, let me pull this up, because I made it big. There's some URLs if you want to go right now and play around with stuff. The easier one to remember is our live site. There's a link in the footer to the GitHub. The one right below is the GitHub, but that's a bit longer. So if you want, go to the short version and just scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a link there to all the source information. Yep. And also fun if you're into design stuff, we've also tried to write and document all of our design process as well. So for example, when I was like, well, should I make this a PowerPoint or should I write it up? I was like, well, I'm going to try writing it up and see how the presentation goes, because then it'll be there with all the other documentation, and we'll see. So did you have a question?
So do you have strategies for, other than saying your deadline's going to slip, for people say, here's the test data, but we really need real data?
Yeah, so the question was, do I have any strategies for that conversation around getting real data out of folks and being on that team and trying to have that conversation with your stakeholders? Like, no, really, this is going to be a thing. With this project in particular, it seemed to work well, and I think I've seen this work in other cases too. It seemed to work well to we have the luxury of having time. If you're on a short-term contract, that sort of thing, it's much more difficult. I was in a place where I could build relationships with folks across the office so they understood, and do small things for people across the office so they got used to how these things work. And so, okay, you don't want me to have access to this entire thing because you haven't approved it quite yet. How about, what are the columns that you usually use? How are these things split up? Can you give me 10 rows? But you're going to say that, okay, these are exactly the types of information that'll be in those 10 rows, that sort of thing. That seems to work okay. Because again, I say, oh, we need the real data, but if you can get a sample that is actually structured the way it will be, that's pretty good. There's another, we sometimes did things where, okay, give us all the data, we will not make it public for 3 more months or something like that. But let us play with it behind this wall so we can actually see what's going on. And I think I have a note, if you ever read that thing too, one of the nice things is once you get into a more advanced place with all these things, once you start adding things like data tests, and they're helping the folks that are creating the data actually make the data cleaner in the future, then you make all the friends. So it's this process over time. Does that help answer your question at all? Yeah. Do you have any tips?
No, I think the iterative example thing, just saying, well, this is going to delay the product.
Oh.
It's more about the power of data and trust. Right?
Yeah, exactly. She had mentioned that it's more about the kind of trust between groups and making that an iterative process over time. Yeah. So a lot of this, exactly, it's a lot of that, especially in this context. This is a context where we're taking data sets from across government and trying to make them into something that a human can understand who's not in that process. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the classic question, how have you tried to measure the success of this? Is it something more than just user engagement? People are getting insights from the organizations and that stuff.
Right. The question, which you rightly said, the classic question: are you measuring success? How are you measuring success? Is it user insight? Is it something else? That sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. So a few different ways. So 18F as an organization was started on the idea that we can provide better government services across federal government, or provide government services in a more modern way, meaning, you see the site and you don't think it's a government site because it's actually doing something that helps you, maybe, or is, relatively user-friendly. So one of the things that we're very proud about with this particular site is that now the organization that we work with is working on founding its own data services team and wants to extend this kind of user-centered approach across its entire organization. So for us, that's a huge success. And it's like this reach, right? So it's a little bit different than some other organizations, I think, in the way that we measure whether this has been useful or not. It's kind of uptake by other groups. Also, this has been cited as the kind of future of EITI internationally. Germany has forked this site and has building their own based on this code. I think we've gone to Mexico and done trainings in user-centered design. So again, our metrics are a little bit different, I think, than some other folks. One thing that we are sad about is that it doesn't get a lot of traffic. And that's been a challenging thing for government overall. I think you've probably seen in the news how communications are a difficult thing in government. It was difficult before, and now with the administration change, it's extra difficult, the layers of approval you need. So having conversations about how to do like something like this, have a hack day based on this data and invite different groups of people into a place or something like that is a really different way of thinking about outreach in the government context. It's not just like, they're like, oh, well, we sent out a thing to, what did they do? They do public releases, I don't remember. The thing that they traditionally do in government is a little bit different than how any of you would probably think about outreach. So that's one of the things we're still working on. Oop, we've got a couple. We've got 5 minutes, but we can take a few more.
I was wondering how the new administration and their
Yeah, so the question was how might the new administration, in particular with their stance on transparency, affect things like this? It's interesting. It's both a lot and a little. There are certain things that it seems like the new administration is really focused on, like those big ticket items that are in their minds. And then meanwhile, there's the rest of government. And this is not particularly high on the new administration's radar. So far it's been a bit like, well, it's still going, but it doesn't have the support like it used to have under the old administration. But on the other hand, I think because of that, the office that runs this within the Department of the Interior they see it as an opportunity to figure out where internally in government they can help things move along. And so there's the effort that created this is not going away. What it might be called in the future, don't know. But the department itself is still really excited about all the things that happened here. So we will see. Well, what they say, when one door shuts, a window opens, something like that. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Let's see. Okay, we've got a few more. Go ahead.
So the iterative process.
Yeah.
Building a relationship and showing regular deliverables. Do you think that's possible in private enterprise where you're basically carving off, oh, here's 3 devs, here's two QA, person. Is that possible, or you've got a time slice, you got it for 6 months, good luck as your deliverable?
Yeah. So the question was in private enterprise where sometimes you're given half of a person here, that person there, and you've got 6 months to create a thing. Is that iterative process still possible? I'd say it depends. I'm sure there's certain situations where you're not given that flexibility in an org, but I still think there's a lot to be. I mean, when we first started this, for example, no one knew what Agile was, they didn't know what iterative was. They're not letting me use pieces of data sets, right? So if you have the patience to be a bit of an evangelist for showing the results from this sort of work, you can slowly move along, but it's tiring. So it depends on whether you want to take that up or not, I think. But there tends to be small pieces. Maybe you won't get 100% of the iteration that you wanted, but you'll be able to do at least a user testing cycle or 3, and that's always better than 0. Let's see. Can we go all the way back and then we'll... Yeah. Oh, so the question is, how do we think about roles that you might need for a project like this? So in our organization, we typically staff based on project needs, this kind of thing. But often for something like this, our projects aren't huge. We'd probably in this case, it was staffed with 2 folks who are more dev-oriented, one in particular, who had a lot of experience in online mapping and data work. We had a content designer, a PM UX kind of thing, that was me, and and a visual designer. So that's 5. And that was kind of how we rolled it, and it really worked quite well. Our organization is very design heavy relative to, I think, a lot of private industry, in particular because none of this is crazy data science, right? It's a lot of trying to communicate policy, and that's really hard, and trying to have all those conversations with stakeholders. And so that tends to be more of our challenge than other things. But yeah, did that answer your question? Oh, I see. Got it. Yeah. So the question was do you see a CSV? And they're like, oh my God, I need a data person. No, I don't think we look at it that straightforwardly. We also have, if somebody, got assigned to a project and had never done online mapping before, which I'm not sure if we have anybody like that, 0, right? there's enough people in the org that they could ask, that kind of thing. And all this is open source. So once we've done one of these, it's like, hey, this worked pretty well. And we're looking across. We tend to do relatively a lot of data projects, so you can look across and see what other people did. But yeah, oh my gosh, I think we're out of time. But we can keep chatting later. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you want to come chat, come find me. And yeah, you can go there and find all the stuff written. Thank you so much.